All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today is Free Agent Friday, where I'll be breaking down 8 defensive free agents I think the Falcons should add this offseason.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, writing weekly content at the Falcon, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday. Of course, you can find Locked On Falcons free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, as well as now on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel and give us a like when you do. So today is Free Agent Friday, our second Free Agent Friday in a row, where last week I broke down the offensive free agents, sort of a mock offseason and free agent signing period, where I went through the offensive side of the ball and several players, revamping the wide receiver room, solidifying the offensive line that I would like to see. And today we're looking at the defensive side of the ball, where we'll be going through the defensive line, the linebackers and corners and safeties, as well as special teams, to talk about some of the free agents that I think are realistic in this scenario where, we're envisioning the Falcons having little more than about $30 million in cap space. And as a refresher on that last week's episode, the ways that I was able to create that cap space was borrowing a page from the outline from Steve Weish that he said with the Falcons extending Grady Jarrett and extending Jake Matthews, potentially saving $20 or so million, trading Calvin Ridley and Deion Jones, saving them another $20 or so million. Obviously, we know that the Calvin Ridley trade is now off the table, but you still getting $11 million in savings. So it's a neutral move as far as the salary cap is concerned, and then adding a couple more savings by cutting players like Tyler Davidson and trading Kendall Sheffield for a third string tight end as a way to solidify that position. So that's sort of how we created the cap space, and I'll use what leftover cap space I have from the offensive side of the ball to sort of shore up the defense. And we'll start with the defensive line. It all starts up front. And similar to how I did the wide receiver group last year, where I sort of revamped that position with a half a dozen free agent signings at wide receiver, we're kind of doing the same thing for this defensive line and edge rusher group. I'm looking at 3 edge rushers that I'm trying to sign in Jacob Martin, Lorenzo Carter, and Whitney Merciless. On the interior, I'm trying to sign Josh Tupos and F.A. Obata. And, I think even though I'm signing these 3 edge rushers, it still leaves the door open for the Falcons to take an edge rusher particularly high in the draft. Merciless is kind of being brought in to be that sort of veteran leader to sort of take that young, hopefully high-level pass rusher, but probably raw pass rusher at the top of the draft under his wing. And ideally, like someone like a Justin Houston would be for that role, but PFF, Pro Football Focus, projects Justin Houston's contract to be like a 1-year, $7 million deal. They project a similar amount for Jason Pierre-Paul, who I also sort of envision potentially in that role. And so I'm going with Merciless because he's not in PFF's top 200 free agent rankings. So I'm assuming I can get him at cheaper price, like maybe a 1-year, $4 million, 1-year, $5 million deal. Merciless sort of slipped down the last couple of years in Houston, looked resurgent in brief action with the Packers midway through last season. So hopefully you can sort of get him at that same level moving forward. And, he's essentially going to sort of be the veteran leader in that room. And I have a couple of other young guys in Jacob Martin and Lorenzo Carter to sort of help him out and provide some juice. Carter is essentially the Stephen Means replacement, playing more of that coverage role, that run-stopping role, and still can provide some juice as a pass rusher. Is familiar with Gary Emanuel, the Falcons D-line coach, when he was with the Giants. Obviously a Georgia alum, so certainly a homecoming for him. PFF projects him at 2 years, $8 million. So I feel like you can get, considerable production at that price tag. And, he's been a guy that's been pretty consistently, getting you up to 5 sacks a season, up to 35 pressures a year. And so hopefully you can see that continue. Martin's production level is kind of similar when you sort of project out what he could do. And he's essentially going to be my Dante Fowler replacement. Clowney's on the brain because he was the guy that was part of that Clowney trade between Seattle and Houston a couple of years ago. But essentially, like, while these guys aren't necessarily really moving the needle as far as the pass rush is concerned, like, I feel like Martin is probably a lateral move from what you got from Dante Fowler and Vic Beasley last couple of years. You look at those two guys combined over the last 3 seasons, they've generated 96 pressures and 15 and a half sacks, which is about 5 sacks and 30 pressures a year. And they've been paid about $35 million combined over those 3 seasons, Beasley and Fowler, that is, so about $12 million a year. And so I'm sitting here thinking like, well, Martin can kind of give you that same production, but with PFF's projection of him getting a 2-year, $6.5 million contract, essentially I'm paying $3 million to get the same level of production that I've been paying $12 million the last 3 years to get. And so while, again, you're not necessarily making a huge upgrade at that position, you're getting a lot better bang for your buck. And that's kind of my overall strategy with this D-line group. Moving on to the interior, Josh Tupos, that big 340-pound nose tackle, that sort of immovable object. He was really good for the Bengals in 2019. Then he sat out the 2020 season due to COVID and then came back this past year and, dealt with a lot of injuries. And you're just kind of hoping that, you can get him to perform at that 2019 level. And again, no projections on his contract from PFF. But, I'm thinking similar price tag of what you're getting Carter and what you're getting Martin at, so $2-3 million a year or something along that object. And then with Obata, Tupou's going to be my run stopper. Obata's going to be my designated pass rusher. He's going to be the guy on third downs lining up next to Grady Jarrett on the interior and providing that pressure. And he's been a very productive situational pass rusher these last couple of years with Buffalo and Carolina. You guys a handful of you guys may recall that he was with the Falcons in preseason in the summer of 2016 and basically left Atlanta and then kind of blossomed in Carolina over the next couple of years. And you look at the last 4 seasons, he's had a combined 11 sacks and 73 pressures across 749 career pass rushing snaps. And you compare that to, say, a Jeffrey Simmons, who had about 689 pass rushing snaps this past season, in playoffs included, and had about 66 pressures and 11 and a half sacks. And so on a similar workload over 4 years, Obata basically has been as productive as Jeffrey Simmons was this past year. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that Obata's, Jeffrey Simmons, but it's a player that, like, again, looking at the similar strategy I had with the wide receiver, where it's like you're getting a bunch of sort of young, unproven guys, bring them to Atlanta to have an opportunity for an expanded role. They've kind of been buried on some of these rotations and these depth charts these last couple of years, and now they'll get an opportunity to prove themselves that they're capable of more. And I think Obata in limited action has been very effective as a pass rusher. So it's now like, let's see if we can get him 300 plus snaps and see what he can produce and give you maybe 5 to 8 sacks this upcoming season if he can maintain that level of pressure. And it's like you look at the 5 guys I'm adding with, again, Stephen Means being replaced by Lorenzo Carter, Dante Fowler being replaced by Jacob Martin, Ade Ogundeji being replaced by Whitney Merciless, Taquan Graham by F.A. Obata, and Tyler Davison by Josh Tupou. And those 5 guys that I just named on the Falcons roster were the 5 most guys that got the most number of pass rushing snaps behind Grady Jarrett. And so you're sort of swapping in those guys, and those guys combined for about over 1,200 snaps last year and generated about 60 pressures and 6.5 sacks combined. And with this group of players, if they just sort of produce at the same level of pressure rate that they had a year ago with their respective teams, if they get the same amount of workload, 1,200 or so snaps, they're, instead of 60 pressures, they're, potentially going to produce 110 pressures. So you're pretty much doubling your pressures. And then instead of 6.5 sacks, they would potentially, theoretically, be able to produce 15 or 16 sacks. So essentially you're kind of adding 50 pressures and like almost 10 sacks this season to your defensive line with these 5 additions over the 5 guys that they're potentially replacing in the rotation, which is basically what Brian Burns' production was this past year. And instead of spending all that money, $12 million or so, whatever the price tag would be for these 5 players in terms of their cap space this upcoming season on one player, right? As so many people advocate for, I'm spreading that $12 million over 5 players. And so again, it's getting the strategy of getting the most bang for your buck. Again, you're not going to necessarily completely, make this pass rush into, one of the better units in the league, but maybe you can make a substantial jump. But a lot of people are sort of looking at maybe some splashier names, maybe some, guys that are more proven options. Certainly, there are several free agents potentially hitting the market that have connections to this coaching staff. When we saw last off season where the Falcons signed a bunch of players that had previous connections to this coaching staff and this front office. And so some of the names that stand out in that group are on the interior, you have BJ Hill. You have Eddie Goldman, assuming he gets cut by the Bears this offseason. Henry Anderson, if he gets cut by the Patriots. Sheldon Rankins, Akeem Hicks, Bilal Nichols, Brandon Williams, Jonathan Hankins, Brent Urban, Hassan Ridgeway, Justin Jones. And then at the edge rushers, you have Zadarius Smith, Jerry Hughes, Ryan Kerrigan, Pernell McPhee, Alex Okafor, Al-Qadin Muhammad. And then you have some sort of mid-tier free agents that aren't necessarily connected to this coaching staff, but at least in my mind, seem to make a little bit of sense if you're willing to spend a little bit more money than some of the guys that I'm projecting for the Falcons to sign, like William Golston and Uchenna Nwosu, Derek Barnett, are some of those names that I've seen other people sort of throw around. So those are the Falcons certainly will have options to upgrade their pass rush. But for me, I'm trying to spread the love. I'm trying to borrow a page from the Bills, from what they did under their general manager, Brandon Beane, a couple of years ago, where they went out and signed like 15 guys without spending a whole lot of money, and to get the most bang for your buck, rather than putting it all on one player, rather than putting it all on a Zadarius Smith or an Akeem Hicks, and spending $12 million on one of those guys. And basically, for example, with an Akeem Hicks or even Zadarius Smith, both of those guys have dealt with injuries the last couple of years. And so if you get one swing at that, one bite at that apple, and if they are battling injuries this upcoming season, you completely whiffed, right? At least with my strategy, again, not suggesting that any Jacob Martin's going to outproduce Zadarius Smith or F.A. Obata is going to outproduce Akeem Hicks, but you're getting like 5 bites at the apple, right? So even if one of those free agent signings doesn't work out, you still have an opportunity to hit on some of these other guys that are still going to give you value that you're not going to necessarily have if you just take one big swing at one free agent or whatever the case may be. So that's kind of the onus behind my strategy. And we'll move on from the defensive line group and get into the linebacker core, and talk about whether or not the Falcons will be able to afford to re-sign Foye Oluokun, and if not, who they could potentially bring in to replace him. And we'll also talk about the potential replacement for Deion Jones in this hypothetical scenario where we've already traded Deion Jones this offseason. We'll get into all of that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But guys, baseball is back. So why not check out the Locked On Braves podcast to see what the Braves are going to be up to now that the season is on track to begin. So check out Locked On Braves on the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. And we also know it is that time of year where college basketball's tournament is finally upon us, and March Madness is descending from the rafters to engage us all. And you can find the latest odds, contests, and player props at betonline.net, which remains the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, news, and more this season. And in the month of March, they're going to have some great contests for you to get involved in this March Madness. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline has you covered for all the sports, whether it's boxing, UFC, golf. We know baseball's coming back. If you want to get in on these football draft props, you can do so by heading to the website today at betonline.net, or use your mobile device to sign up and learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So the Falcons linebackers situation is going to be interesting because obviously Foye Oluokun is an impending free agent. And obviously in this sort of, free agent Friday scenario, we've already traded Deion Jones to get the $9 million in cap space. And now we're going to have to find a replacement there. And no, I'm not going to necessarily just hand the job to Michael Walker, although we know that it is a potential option for the Falcons, particularly if they want to save a little bit of money rather than going in there and signing a replacement. But, what's going to be interesting is whether or not the Falcons can retain Foye Oluokun. Theoretically, we kind of always assume, okay, we'll trade Deion Jones and we'll use the cap savings we get from Deion Jones to re-sign Foye Oluokun. But that might hit a snag because, you've seen a lot of reports from people like Albert Bouier of SI.com, Mike Garafolo from NFL Network, and even Pro Football Focus dropped an article this week that basically all of these people are saying Foye Oluokun is going to be one of these free agents that gets paid a lot more than expected. And we've been talking, hoping that Foye's market would be like 8 to 10 million, which is seemingly, at the upper end of where the Falcons could potentially afford. But it sounds like based off of what these people are saying, that's going to be 10 to 12 million. And even before all these reports started coming out, when I was working on this last week, I had to sort of make sure the math balanced out when I was doing the offense with the defense. I was kind of already assuming that the Falcons were not going to be able to keep Foye Oluokun because it felt like this was potentially going to happen. And so now I have to go out there and see if I can find 2 starting linebackers in free agency. And the 2, I'm just going to give these guys a call and say, come down from Nashville and move to Atlanta, and I'll take both of you. And that's Jayon Brown and Rashaan Evans, who have been the starting inside linebackers for the Titans the last couple of years, although this past year they lost their jobs. But they were really good under Dean Pease when he was there. And so, like, you look at where their price tags are, and you're not seeing these guys, despite being, semi-productive starters these last couple of years, they're not being considered, at the top of this linebacker free agent class. PFF has Brown's contract projected to be a 2-year, $9.5 million contract. They don't even have Rashaan Evans in their top 200 rankings. So again, I'm thinking maybe I can get him on like a 1-year prove-it deal for like $2 to $3 million or something like that. And so, like, I feel like you're getting pretty decent bang for your buck at that point in time. You can argue probably lateral play from Brown at Mike linebacker from what you got from Foye Oluokun and Rashaan Evans at will linebacker from Deion Jones for a lot less money than you would have to pay to retain both of those guys this upcoming season. So we'll just sort of have to see how that goes. To be if those guys can sort of handle the starting spot. You still have Michael Walker as your backup to give you solid depth there. You can probably bring back someone like Darren Bates to play special teams, and he is also a former Titan from Dean Pease's days there. So again, you're just basically making it all about the Titans linebackers or whatever the case may be, and you can still draft a linebacker later in the draft. Probably in the middle rounds, maybe on day 3 or something like that. Someone that you can see grooming as a potential starter down the road. And so in a scenario where you're signing Rashaan Evans to a 1-year contract this year, okay, he plays out this season. You still have Michael Walker under contract, and 2023 is going to be the final year of his rookie contract, I think, right? So am I wrong in that? Yes, that sounds right. Sorry, I'm sitting here like, did we draft him in 2020 or 2021? But yeah, we drafted him in 2020. So 2023 would be his final year of rookie contract. By then, you'd be probably comfortable with him plugging and playing. Hopefully, he has a really good 2023 season, then hits the open market, then leaves. You get a comp pick for him, and then that rookie that you drafted this past year, he slides in, and you just sort of have this conveyor belt, and you just start collecting comp picks or whatever the case may be. Again, that's probably maybe a pie in the sky dream or whatever the case may be, but that's kind of the onus behind the strategy. Just like, okay, we solidify the Mike linebacker, and the Will linebacker is just basically, a revolving door over the next couple of years. We just need to get competent play from that position. And I think all of these guys, Evans, Walker, and hopefully, a 3rd or 4th round pick as a rookie can potentially provide that. And so, when we look at some potential other options for the Falcons at that linebacker position, I do not think the Falcons are going to be in the Bobby Wagner market. From all indications in the 24 hours since he's been released, or however many hours it's been, he's going to have a very robust market. And so the Falcons are not going to be in there. Nor do I think the Falcons should be looking, signing Bobby Wagner is basically the move that you make to help put you over the top to win the Super Bowl. And we know that's not necessarily something that the Falcons are really in a position to do. And so when I look at potential impending linebacker free agents, you have some guys that have connections to this coaching staff. You have Josh Bynes, who played under Dean Pease in Baltimore, physical downhill run defender. You also have Alec Ogletree hitting free agency, Alex Anzalone, John Bostic, Christian Jones, Joe Igbinu, I don't know how to say his name, the Bears special teamer. And so maybe Ryan Pace is like, oh, we like him a lot, and he just needs an opportunity or something like that. Then you have some potential cap cuts. Corey Littleton has already been mentioned as a player that the Raiders are cutting. I've heard Nick Kwiatkowski is also a guy that the Raiders might wind up cutting this offseason. Corey Littleton played under Falcons linebacker Frank Bush in his rookie season back in LA with the Rams, and Nick Kwiatkowski was drafted by Ryan Pace in Chicago. And some other free agents that don't necessarily have coaching connections, but like some guys that I'm like, if the Falcons want to spend probably a decent amount of money, but not necessarily break the bank, someone's probably going to be a lot cheaper than Foye Oluokun. Leighton Vander Esch's name keeps popping up in my brain as this guy that maybe really good fit in sort of a Dean P style defense where he can sort of use that size and length to rush the quarterback a little bit more. He hasn't necessarily been very productive these last couple of years in Dallas, been very inconsistent, but maybe could use a fresh start, and maybe you can get him playing back at that level that he played at, during his rookie season where he was like a defensive rookie of the year or whatever he was. Another player that makes a ton of sense is Kenny Young, very athletic guy, kind of bounced around the league, played on the Ravens after Dean Pease left under Wink Martindale. So, there's some familiarity with the scheme there. So those are some candidates for the linebacker group. Let's move on to the special teams before we get into the secondary. I'm basically doing the thing that I think all of us agreed the Falcons should do is re-sign all the guys. Like Younghoe Koo's a restricted free agent, re-sign him to his 1 year, $4 million tender. I know a lot of people will say, like, let's extend him or whatever the case may be. Like, that's not something that would be a priority to me because I just don't think you're going to be saving a ton of cap space by doing that. So just give him the $4 million and we'll talk extension next year, hopefully when the Falcons have a little bit more breathing room from a cap standpoint. And then Thomas Morstead and Josh Harris, the punter and long snapper respectively, I'm trying to bring them back on 1 year contracts. Again, hopefully you can get Josh Harris on a veteran minimum deal, maybe kick him some guaranteed money to sweeten the pot a little bit for him. I don't think you're going to have too much problem re-signing Josh Harris, though. But just, make him whole so that he's not necessarily getting cut the week before or week one or whatever the case may be in future years with some more of that guaranteed money. And then Thomas Morstead, again, you're kind of hoping that you can get him on a cheap deal, maybe 1 year, $1.5 million sort of at its max. And that would be a good price point for, basically our special teams and team MVP because when it comes to, it's AJ Tyrell and Thomas Morstead were the best players on the team last year. I will fight you on anything. You can throw out Grady Jarrett, you can throw out Cordero Patterson and Kyle Pitts, but I will take Tyrell and Morstead as the guys that consistently were balling out each and every week this past season. So we got to bring back Thomas Morstead, our Lord and Savior. So that's where we're going to leave it with the special teams. We're going to continue today's episode by getting into some of these secondary pieces that I will try to add, hopefully, to upgrade the secondary. But as you can tell, we spent a lot of resources on the D-line, so there's not going to be a whole lot left over from the secondary to upgrade. But I feel like, we might be able to still get some decent bang for our buck as we wrap up today's Free Agent Friday here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. But before we get there, guys, I do want to plug the Locked On NFL podcast, which you can find on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons. And make sure you check out Locked On NFL, as those guys are breaking down all the biggest stories around the NFL. Want to get more insight into the Khalil Mack trade, the Russell Wilson trade, the Carson Wentz trade. So much stuff is going on around the NFL. So go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you're currently listening or watching me. So, guys, it's that time of year where Built Bar is unveiling some very special flavors. Do you like mint and chocolate? What about mint and white chocolate? Well, maybe you'll like the white chocolate shamrock flavor that is now available at Built.com. Or maybe that's not your speed, and maybe you're more interested in the German chocolate. Built Bar's always got limited time flavors. You always got to check out the website every single day to see what's available at Built.com. And when you do, make sure you use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. But maybe those flavors aren't that interesting. Maybe you just want to go with the tried and trues. You got salted caramel, coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, and so much more. And then all these Built Bar flavors, whatever your preferred flavor, are going to be great because Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, but it's not just good taste. It's good for you. And you know that because they're low in sugar, they're low in calories, they're low in carbs, they're high in protein, they're high in fiber. So go check out all the variety of flavors at Built.com. And again, use that promo code LOCK15 and you get 15% off your order. That's a LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. So I had some difficulty with the secondary because I'm looking at this list of free agent corners, these impending guys, and I'm basically looking for the next Fabian Moreau. I'm looking to see, okay, is there a guy out there that has talent that just hasn't gotten that much opportunities to play and we probably can get at like a veteran minimum contract or very close to it. And there's a potential that we can get decent play, right? We sat here, all season long, and this is a Fabian Moreau Stan, podcast or whatever the case may be. Like, he's not a superstar. He's probably a league average starter at best. But, for $1 million a year, like, that's pretty good value. And the hope is to try to sort of cut some corners and pinch some pennies that you can, do that again this off season. And I just didn't really see a guy that really stood out that way. There's certainly some young, talented corners that are hitting the market that certainly are deserving of getting the starting opportunities that would be great number twos across from AJ Tyrell, but I don't think any of those guys can be cheap, right? And so, like, the only player that really sort of stood out to me that I felt like could possibly be the next Fabian Moreau was Anthony Averitt, who plays for the Ravens and played at Alabama, where, the Falcons do have a little bit of a coaching connection with Nick Perry as one of their sort of assistants in the secondary. So he was like the one guy, but like, I know Averitt got a lot of playing time this past year due to all the injuries that the Ravens had in their secondary, and was just okay. So it doesn't feel like, oh, like this guy's, a star in the making or anything like that. So that was the best I could come up with. And because that was it, like, I was just like, well, you just might as well just try to re-sign Fabian Moreau, maybe give him a little bit of a raise, not too much, maybe like $2-3 million, based off of that. And then you just sort of bring him back for another year, just to kind of be your stopgap placeholder type of guy. And you hope that you get a really good corner in the draft. But, I was having visions of maybe taking a corner at 8. I was big on the Trent McDuffie bandwagon until the combine, and him and Derek Stingley not necessarily measuring up, and that sort of killed the dreams of taking a corner that high. And so now instead you're like, okay, maybe we'll take an edge rusher or whatever the case may be, and maybe we'll get a corner later on day 2 or something like that, and develop that guy. And Fabian Moreau will sort of be that placeholder for another year. And so that's kind of my thought process on it. And then at the nickel cornerback spot, you try to bring back Isaiah Oliver, probably again on another 1-year deal, probably paying him like $1 million, $1.5 million or something like that again. And the hope that, he can come back and play at the level he did before his injury, coming off, his undisclosed knee injury or whatever the case may be. And you just kind of kick the can at the cornerback position until next year. And hopefully you'll be in a position next year to get the cornerbacks of your dreams or whatever the case may be, or maybe Moreau and or Oliver or Darren Hall or Avery Williams or whoever, sort of, make it worth your while and say, like, okay, let's keep those guys or whatever the case may be if they show improvement or whatever the case may be. So let's talk about the safety position. And, like, this is the one position on defense where I'm not going to spend the big money on a pass rusher. I'm not going to spend the big money on a linebacker. Like, I want to make if I'm going to make any splash in free agency, it's going to be at the safety position. But again, it's going to be hard to do so because we're scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of the Falcons cap space. And so just looking at the PFF projections, I'm looking at, okay, where can I get the most bang for my buck? And that's probably Anthony Harris. His projection from PFF is 1 year, $3.5 million. And, he's coming off a down year in Philadelphia after, they went out and signed him to a 1-year sort of deal last year. But a couple of years ago, he was one of the best cover 2 safeties in the NFL when he played for the Vikings. And so I'm hoping that the prove it year that he's hoping for, that's going to be the big, sort of lead to the big contract with all the guaranteed money, have that in Atlanta, right? And if we, look, we'll be willing to pay that contract next year or whatever the case may be if you deserve it, right? So, like, that's what I'm kind of hoping for, and I'm just kind of, I think that's the best sort of scenario for the Falcons. And since one of these other players is probably going to be a little bit more expensive, like a Marcus May, certainly a Marcus Williams. Some of the other free agents that have those coaching connections like those two guys do: Jordan Whitehead, Kareem Jackson, Malik Hooker, DeAndre Houston Carson, Tayshaun Gibson, Deion Bush, PJ Williams, Dane Cruikshank, MJ Stewart, Jason McCourty, Terrence Brooks, Andrew Adams, and Troy Apke. Then you also have some guys that don't have coaching connections, but are high-level safeties, certainly starting caliber guys: Honey Badger, Quandre Diggs, Justin Reed, Rodney McLeod, Adrian Amos is listed as a potential cap cut based off of some sources by the Packers, and he was obviously drafted by Ryan Pace in Chicago. So the Falcons, it feels like if they can sort of pinch pennies or whatever the case may be, they can actually go out there and get a impact safety at this position to come in and join Jalen Hawkins and Richie Grant at the position. And then I would probably bring back one of Erik Harris and Duron Harmon. My obvious choice would be Erik Harris. I let Duron Harmon walk. I feel like Erik Harris coming off, even though he's coming off a torn pectoral muscle, you can get him probably on a 1-year sort of veteran minimum contract to come in and be that third safety. If not him, then Shawn Williams. Essentially, I would offer both of those guys like a 1-year veteran minimum contract or a 1-year, $1.2 million contract or something. And whichever one's willing to play for that, okay, you can be the veteran, third safety, until we sign that free agent. Or we'd still have an opportunity to draft somebody again in a hypothetical world where Kyle Hamilton falls to the Falcons at 8. You could still draft him, particularly if you sign an Anthony Harris, have Harris play free safety, how Kyle Hamilton plays strong safety. And yeah, that puts Grant and Hawkins on the back burner, but like, is that really a problem? Like, well, we can't, push aside those two guys so that, so that's why we're going to pass on Kyle Hamilton. Like, no one's going to say that. So we'll see about that. In terms of free agent corners, Tavon Young was cut by the Ravens. He's a Pease guy from Baltimore, had a really good rookie season in Baltimore as an outside corner, has primarily been a nickel corner in the year since they basically drafted Marlon Humphrey and all those other guys in the year since. So he could be a potential option for the Falcons to replace, Fabian Moreau. AJ Bouier is another player that's rumored to be a potential cap cut. No coaching connections, but certainly a guy that you would look at and say would be a major upgrade as that number 2 corner over what we have in Fabian Moreau. If you're looking for corners with coaching connections, some of these guys probably won't be cheap. You have Kyle Fuller, an older guy. Jimmy Smith's another older guy. Pierre Desir, Rashawn Melvin, Buster Screen. You got Danny Johnson from Washington, Nate Hairston from Denver, Terrence Mitchell from Houston, Bryce Callahan, really good nickel corner from Denver. Some other sort of mid-tier free agents that would certainly be upgrades at that number 2 spot, similar to AJ Bouier, probably a little younger than AJ Bouier, which are Dante Jackson from Carolina, Steven Nelson, most recently with the Eagles after several years with the Steelers. Eli Apple has been another guy that, you're getting a decent or at least a high variance starting corner that can give you really good play and really bad play, as most people are aware of with Eli Apple, very polarizing player. And so, that there's value to that, maybe potentially, if you can get him at the right price. So those are some of the candidates in the secondary that I think make sense for the Falcons. And we'll see, if the Falcons wind up signing any of these players, now having done 2 free agent Fridays, I know when you listen to all these moves, like you listen to them like, oh yeah, there's sound logic, Aaron, but like none of these moves have that real sex appeal that I'm looking for this offseason. They're not really moving the needle for me. And like, I get it. Like, I don't really think it's realistic to think that the Falcons are going to really move the needle. I think really my strategy is just like, okay, I can fix the offensive line. I can lay a foundation for at least a decent pass rush. And it's really just off season, is really about progress. Like that's really kind of the best outcome that I'm sort of foreseeing for this team is it's just like, what progress can we make? What areas of this roster can we make significant improvements from that we're no longer a bottom 5 or bottom 10 unit that we were in a lot of these areas a year ago, but now we're closer to league average or whatever case may be, maybe not above average or whatever case may be. And you hope that Matt Ryan and Kyle Pitts and some of these other guys that are now going to be in their second year under this new regime are going to be, impact players and more impact players than they were a year ago. So that's what, you're kind of hoping for with this free agent offseason. And you just kind of hope next year the Falcons probably move on from Matt Ryan and just hope that you can start, whether you're a rookie that you draft this year or a rookie that you draft next year at the quarterback position. And you can just kind of hope that, again, he's not going to come inherit a playoff caliber team, but you just kind of hope like, okay, well, he can inherit like a almost playoff caliber team, like almost a team that kind of peaks at like a 7 or 8 win team this year, which is kind of where I'm going to expect at this point in time. And you just kind of hope that you can build off of that for the future. And sort of like, again, not the most positive, optimistic outcome. And again, could be lowballing the Falcons here. But this is one of those things where you just kind of hope for the best with the Falcons at this point moving forward. And, it's difficult because you see all these other sort of big moves that other teams are making where they're really making a push for it. And you're getting that FOMO, that fear of missing out feeling. And so if you want to go check out and live vicariously through some of these other teams, of course, you can find that with Locked On Chargers and Locked On Broncos and Locked On Commanders. It's still hard to say that. And all these other big moves that these teams are making, and whether or not they're really moving the needle for those teams to go out there and snatch it all, as we've seen the Bucs and the Rams do these last couple of years. And of course, in addition to those shows, you can also check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, where they're giving you all the lowdown on all the the risers, the fallers, the rankings of each position group, with Ryan Tracy and Eric Crocker. So you can find that all free and available on the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. So guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's episode. Appreciate it. Till then.